The circle of silver dust was meant to kill me. And everyone in that hall knew it, but me. And I only had until the wolf reached me to work it out. I had been a servant my whole life, which teaches you to read a room faster than you read your own name, and this room had already decided I was dead. The chosen girls watched from the gallery in their jewels. The Chancellor watched from his chair, with his hands folded like a man at prayer. And in the centre of the ring, the king's wolf came toward me low and wrong. Its grey eyes gone the white of an animal in pure agony. Nothing of the man I knew left anywhere inside it. They were waiting for it to tear out my throat and prove, at last, that I had never truly been chosen. So I did the only thing I have ever known how to do in a room that wants me gone. I reached into my apron pocket, and I knelt down in the silver dust, and I held out my open hand. It was not supposed to be me. I was not even supposed to be in that room. But if I am going to tell it true, I have to go back a full season. To the grey morning, they put a comb and a basin in my hands, and told me to go make the other women beautiful. I was 22, and I prepared the candidates, which is the part of a selection no one writes songs about. There is a great deal of work behind the spectacle of being chosen, and all of it is done by women like me, braiding, lacing, steaming the travel out of silk, painting confidence onto girls too frightened to eat. I was good at it. I was good at it the way you become good at anything you do in order to remain unseen. A servant with quiet hands and a plain face is the most weightless thing in a kingdom, and I had spent years being grateful for the lightness. Because the unseen are also the unblamed. The king I knew the way the kitchens knew him, as whether you survived. Magnus of the Iron Territories had held his throne for 9 years and never once chosen a Luna, and the realm had grown tired of waiting on an empty chair, and so the selection had been arranged, over his objection, the gossip said, which was the only interesting thing anyone had ever told me about him. A king who did not want the very thing every king is supposed to want. I filed it away the way I filed everything, and I went on lacing other women into their futures, and I did not expect to be in the Great Hall at all when the choosing came. The mate bond is meant to be a thing of destiny, an alpha's wolf knowing its fated one before the man's mind can argue. I have heard it called a recognition that arrives like weather, with no asking and no warning. I want it set down plainly that mine arrived in the form of 140 heads turning to look at me when I had been trying, with my whole life, to make sure no head ever did. Here is how I ended up in the room. Lady Solveig, the Chancellor's niece, the favoured one, the girl everyone already called Luna behind their hands, tore the hem of her gown 3 breaths before the candidates were called in. She tore it on purpose. I have no proof, and I do not need any. She wanted a servant on her knees at the threshold of the Great Hall, so that the contrast, when she swept in, would be total. So I was there, crouched at the back of the hall with a needle in my teeth and thread in Solveig's hem, when the doors boomed shut and the rite began, and I could not get out without crossing in front of 200 wolves. I stayed against the wall. The wall is where I belong. I know it the way you know your own hands. I meant to mend the hem, stay small, and slip out when it was over. The candidates stood in a gleaming row down the centre of the hall. The most beautiful daughters of the realm, scented and jewelled and trembling. And at the far end, on the dais, the king stepped out of his robe and into his other shape. Because in the Iron Territories, the choosing is not done with words. The wolf chooses. It is older than the throne, and it does not lie, and that, I would learn far too late, was the entire problem. He was enormous. Grey as a winter sea, grey as slate, and the hall went silent in the particular way a room goes silent around something that could kill all of it, and has chosen, for now, not to. The wolf came down off the dais. It walked the line of waiting girls. And it did not stop. It passed Lady Solveig, who lifted her chin and offered her hand. It passed the daughter of the northern houses, and the twins from the river country, and every painted, perfect girl I had spent 2 days making lovely, and a sound began to move through the gallery, a confused murmur, because a king's wolf does not simply walk a line of chosen women and decline them all. It does not happen. It had never happened. It came to the end of the row. It kept going. It crossed the open floor, the whole long length of that hall, every step ringing in the silence, straight to the back wall where the servants stood. Straight to me. I had time for exactly one thought, and the thought was there must be someone behind me. There was not. There was only the wall, and me against it, with a needle in my teeth and Lady Solveig's torn hymn still in my fist. The wolf sat down at my feet. It looked up at me with eyes the flat grey of the sea before snow, and it sat, and it did not move, and the silence that fell then was so complete I could hear the thread creak in my own hand. 200 wolves, and not one of them breathing. The candidates stared, the gallery stared, and up on the dais a man I could not yet see was, I would learn, going very still in a way that had nothing to do with calm. No, said Lady Solveig, into all that silence, just that, as if it could be corrected. I knelt, not in homage, but because my knees had stopped consulting me, and the wolf leaned its great head against my shoulder, with a sigh I felt in my teeth, the way an animal leans when it has been looking for something for a long time and has finally set it down. And I thought, with the strange flat clarity of the truly doomed, this is going to ruin my entire life. I was right. I was just wrong about how. They did not let me return to the stillness of the servants' quarters after that. You cannot unchoose what the wolf has chosen. The right forbids it. The oldest law there is. And so a girl who had been mending a hem on the floor an hour before was washed and dressed and installed in the candidate's wing, in rooms finer than any I had cleaned, with the door watched by guards who clearly did not know whether they were protecting me or holding me. The Chancellor came to me that first night. Reynard was a smooth, kind-faced man with grey at his temples and a voice like warm oil, the King's chief adviser and the architect of the whole selection, and he sat across from me and folded his hands the way I would later see him fold them at the edge of a killing circle. What a strange thing the bond is, he said gently. It misfires, sometimes, in old bloodlines especially, a confusion, a weakness. The wolf reaches for the nearest warm body and the mind has to clean up after it. He smiled at me as though we were friends with a shared sorrow. You seem a sensible girl, Maren. You understand that you are not a candidate. When this confusion passes, and it will pass, there will be a place for you. A good place. I look after people who help me. I understood him perfectly. He was offering me a way out of a story I had never asked to be in, and a soft landing if I took it, and he was the only person in 2 days who had spoken to me as if I were a person. I want you to remember that he was kind to me first. It matters, later, how kind he was. Thank you, my lord, I said, and meant it, and believed almost every word, because I also thought the wolf had made a mistake. I had spent a lifetime learning I was ordinary. It was far easier to believe a king's wolf was broken than to believe it had crossed a hall for me. The king I did not see at all, for 3 days. When I finally did, it was not arranged, and it did not go the way the Chancellor's version of events required. I had gone down to the kitchens, because the candidate's wing was suffocating, and the kitchens were the only place in that castle I knew how to breathe, and because there was a boy there. Thomas, an orphan of the last border skirmish, 8 years old and underfoot, and mine in all the ways that matter. Who would worry if I vanished without a word? I was sitting on a flour barrel letting Thomas win at jackstones, when the kitchen went silent the way the great hall had, all at once from the doorway in. The king filled the doorway. Up close, the legend rearranged itself into a man, tall, tired around the eyes, grey-eyed, with a stillness to him that I had taken for cold and was beginning to suspect was something more like exhaustion. He looked at me on my flour barrel with a child's game scattered between us, and something moved across his face that he did not give it leave to, and I watched the most powerful man in the territories try and fail to decide what to do with his own hands. "You are difficult to find," he said, "for someone who has been given rooms. The rooms don't have anyone in them I like, my king." Thomas giggled. A muscle moved at the corner of the king's mouth and was sternly put away. He came in, ducking, too large for the low kitchen by half, and he crouched down, this king who had not chosen a Luna in 9 years. And he gravely lost a round of jackstones to an 8-year-old, and the whole time he kept glancing at me as if I were a sum that would not come right no matter how he worked it. "Your chancellor says your wolf is broken," I said, when Thomas had run off to boast, that it reached for the nearest warm thing. The stillness came over him again, the same one from the dais, I understood now, the stillness of a man struck where there is no armour. "Renard says a great many useful things," he said. He stood. He set the jackstones back in their cup with both hands, oddly careful for so large a man, and he would not look at me when he said the next part. "My wolf is not broken. I wish, very much, that it were. It would be far simpler for everyone." He left before I could ask what he meant, and I sat on the flour barrel with a strange new weight in my chest. Because a king who wishes his wolf had made a mistake is a different problem entirely from a wolf that made one. If you have ever been the lowest person in a room and felt a whole court decide what you are before you opened your mouth, if you want to know whether an ordinary girl could hold her place against people bred their entire lives to take it from her, and what the king's wolf did next that none of them could explain away, stay with me. This is where I stopped believing I was a mistake, and I would not want you to lose the thread now. Walk the rest of it with me. Because his wolf was not finished, whatever the man wanted. It came to the candidate's wing that night, and lay across my door so that the guards could not make me leave, and Lady Solveig could not come in, and in the morning there was a heel of dark bread on my threshold, the plain, hard bread of the kitchens, left by something that had walked the whole castle to bring a servant the one food she would actually recognise. It came again the third night, and put its great head in my lap while I sat reading by the fire, and I noticed, because I notice everything, it is the only gift the wall ever gave me. The old scar on its left foreleg, a band of ruined fur and puckered skin all the way around, the unmistakable mark of an iron trap, an old wound, years old. I sat very still with my hand above that scar, and a cold thing turned over slowly in my memory, and I did not yet let myself look at it directly. But I had seen a wound like that before. I had made a wound like that stop bleeding before, with these same hands, a long time ago, in a forest, for a wolf I had never expected to see again. The detonation came 4 days later, and it came, fittingly, from Renard, who had grown less kind by the hour as the confusion stubbornly refused to pass. He had me brought to the king's council chamber, ostensibly to settle my situation. In truth, to put me in front of the king and his advisers and break the thing in the open. He laid it out reasonably, regretfully. The bond was false, or it was tainted. Either way, it could not be permitted to seat a servant beside the throne while the realm's alliances hung on the selection. There were rights, old rights, for confirming a true bond, and surely the king would want the truth confirmed. And the king, my reluctant king, who had spent 9 years not wanting this and 4 days losing the war to want it anyway, said nothing for a long moment, and I watched him almost let Renard win. I watched him reach for the easy door. It would have been so much simpler to let them call it a mistake. Then Gunnar, the king's second in command, a blunt grey bearded warrior, who had said perhaps 6 words to me in total, spoke up from the wall. "Tell them, Magnus," he said quietly, "or I will. I was there. I carried you home." The room went still. And the king looked at me, really looked, the way the wolf had looked up at me from the hall floor, and he stopped reaching for the easy door, and he told them. 3 years ago, before the throne sat as heavy as it now did, he had gone into the northern forest alone in his wolf shape, as kings of the Iron Territories sometimes do, to remember he was a creature and not only a crown. And he had stepped in a poacher's iron trap. And he had lain there a day and a night, silver-touched and fevered, and unable to shift back, dying by slow inches in a wood where no one knew to look for their king, until a girl came along a forest path with bread in her apron and a basket of washing on her hip. A servant girl, who did not run from a wolf the size of a horse caught screaming in iron, who talked to it low and steady while she worked the trap's jaws apart with a rock and her bare bleeding hands, who pulled the silver pin from its leg and bound the wound with a strip torn off her own underskirt, and fed it the bread out of her own pocket, and sat with it until the fever broke, and then, because she was a servant and servants do not expect thanks, simply picked up her washing and went home, never knowing she had knelt in the dirt for the king of the whole territory. "I never saw her face clearly," the king said, to the silent room. "But to me, I had 3 years to memorize a voice and a pair of hands, and the exact way someone says it's all right. It's all right. I have you to a dying animal." My wolf never stopped looking. I held this selection because it was the only way left to bring every woman in the realm into one room where he could find her. His grey eyes did not leave mine. He did not make a mistake on the dais. Maren, he walked the whole hall because he finally found the one person who was ever merciful to him when he was no one at all. I do not remember standing. I remember the cold thing in my memory turning all the way over and becoming heat. I remember Renard's reasonable face, doing something it had not planned to do, and I remember that the girl who had spent a lifetime against the wall, who had believed herself a mistake for 4 full days because that was easier than believing she mattered, that girl simply put herself away. Folded up small, and gone. Because if it was not a mistake, then I was not weightless after all, and the unblamed do not get to stay unblamed when the king's life turns out to have passed through their hands once already. Then it was real the whole time, I said, and my voice came out harder than anything I had ever let myself say in that castle. And you, to Renard, knew there was a true bond on the table, and you came to my room the first night to make me believe I was nothing, so I would walk away from it before anyone could prove it. You weren't being kind. You were managing a problem. Renard's mouth thinned. The kindness went out of his face like a snuffed lamp, and what was left under it was the thing I should have feared from the first night. And the whole council saw it. And so did I. "Confirm the bond, then," he said, very softly to the king, but his eyes stayed on me. "By the old right, if she is so certain." I did not yet know what I had agreed to by being certain in front of him. I learnt it 3 nights later, in a hall floored with silver dust, with a maddened wolf coming low across the ground toward my open hand. The old rite of confirmation is barbarically simple, and that is why no king had called for it in 100 years. The chosen stands alone and unarmed inside a ring, and the alpha's wolf is brought to them, and a true bond will not strike its mate. The wolf will know her, and kneel, and the realm will witness it. A false bond ends the way false things end. There is no third outcome. It is a test that trusts the wolf completely, which is exactly why Renard did not. I found out afterward what he had done, because Gunnar made him say it in front of the court with a blade at his back. Renard had had the wolf's evening meat laced with powdered silver, not enough to kill the king outright, but enough to drive the wolf out of its mind with pain. to burn away the man inside it, and leave only a screaming animal that would not know its own mate from a deer. He had poisoned the one creature in the world that could clear my name, so that it would kill me in front of everyone, and call it the judgment of the bond. He would lose nothing. The king would wake from the silver grief sick and free, married within the season to a niece who would do as her uncle said, and a servant girl would be a tragic footnote about a confusion that ran its course. It nearly worked. I want you to understand how nearly. They brought the wolf in, and I knew at once it was wrong. It came through the gate of the silver ring on 3 legs, the fourth, the scarred foreleg, the one I had healed, buckling under it, foam at its jaws, its grey eyes rolled to a blind and agonized white. There was nothing of Magnus in it. The silver had eaten him out from the inside, and left the beast alone in its body, and the beast was in such pain it would tear apart the first thing it reached, and the first thing it would reach was me. The gallery went the silence of people watching a death they have decided not to prevent. Lady Solveig looked away. Renard folded his hands. And I had a choice, which is the thing they never expect the servant to have. I could run for the edge of the ring, and the right would call the bond false, and I would live, small and disgraced, against my wall, the rest of my life. Or I could do the other thing. I reached into my apron pocket, where there is always bread, because I have been poor my whole life, and the poor do not walk anywhere empty-handed. I knelt down in the silver dust in the path of the maddened king, and I held out my open hand, with the bread in it, the way I had held it out 3 years ago to a dying animal in a wood, and I said the only words that had ever worked on him. "It's all right," I said. "It's all right. I have you." The wolf hit the dust in front of me, and did not stop, and I did not move. And I saw the silver chain then, the silvered length Renard's man had used to drag it, lying in the dust between us, the thing keeping the poison singing in its blood. So I closed my bare hand around it. I will not pretend it was brave so much, as it was the only thing left. Silver burns a wolf. It only sears the rest of us. It seared me. I felt it take the skin of my palm as I gripped that chain and dragged it out of the ring and away from him, and the pain of it whited out the edges of the world, and I kept hold of his blind grey gaze the whole time, and kept saying it. "It's all right. I have you. It's all right." Through my teeth, through the burn, until the poison's hold loosened just enough, and the wolf, an inch from my throat, with murder in its body and silver in its blood, and nothing of the man left to govern it, stopped. It knew me. Even mad, even dying of pain, the oldest part of him knew the voice and the hands and the bread, the way it had known them across a whole silent hall, the way it had known them in a forest 3 years before there was any bond to speak of. It lowered its great head into my burned and shaking hand, and it sighed the sigh I felt in my teeth, and it set itself down. The hall did not breathe. When Magnus shifted back, slow, grey-faced, the silver still racking him, he was kneeling in the dust of the ring with a servant girl, both of us shaking, my ruined hand in both of his careful ones, and he looked up at the court that had come to watch me die. "The bond is true," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "It has been true for 3 years. The only false thing in this hall is the man who poisoned his king to keep a throne he was never given." He turned his head, and the look he gave Renard I would not have wished on anyone. "Take him." Gunnar took him. The whole rotten scheme came apart in an afternoon. The silvered meat, the bought kitchen hand, the niece who had known and said nothing. Renard was stripped of his chancellorship and his lands, and his name by the next dawn, and sent north under guard to the cold border holds to administer tax ledgers in a stone room for the rest of his life, which Gunnar told me, with great satisfaction, was a far worse fate for a man like that than any blade. Lady Solveig was sent home to the Western houses in a closed carriage, to a marriage her family arranged in a hurry, and I am told she does not speak of the selection at all. The king would not let go of my hand. The burned one. He held it as though it were the most valuable thing in the territories, which, he informed the court, it was. And then, because his wolf had started this whole story and intended to finish it, he shifted once more, there in the ruined ring, and the great grey wolf rose, and walked the length of that hall a second time, past every noble and every guard and every person who had ever outranked me, and lay down at my feet in front of all of them, choosing me again, knowing, this time, letting the whole realm see that the first time had been no mistake. That is the part I would not trade for any crown, not the throne. That, he kissed me later, when the hall had emptied and it was only us and the dying fire, and I will tell you only what broke open in me when he did. Every year of believing I was weightless. Every careful inch of the wall I had held myself against, every it will pass I had let a kind-faced man feed me, all of it simply gone, and under it the plain impossible fact that the most powerful man alive had built an entire selection, turned a kingdom upside down to find the girl who had once knelt in the dirt for a wolf and walked away expecting nothing. Then he rested his brow against mine, careful of my bandaged hand, and neither of us said anything clever for a long while, and somewhere his wolf was unbearably pleased with itself. Half a year on, I keep bread in my apron still, because a Luna of the Iron Territories may carry whatever she likes, and the court has learnt to stop being surprised. The scar on his foreleg, and the scar on my palm match now, his old, mine new, the same iron written into both of us. And on the nights the silver grief comes back on him, slow and cold, I am the one who sits steady in it, my burned hand in his, until it passes. It costs me something each time. I have stopped minding the cost. Thomas eats at the high table and loses at jackstones to a king, with no dignity left to protect. Gunnar calls me my lady without irony now, which from him is roughly a sonnet. A letter came this spring from the northern forest where it all began. From the poacher's village, they had heard, somehow, that the servant who freed the king's wolf was Luna now, and they wanted to know if the story was true. I read it aloud to Magnus. He set down his cup with both hands and looked at the fire for a long while and did not say anything, which from him is a great deal. I still catch myself drifting toward the back wall, sometimes in a crowded hall. Old habits do not die because a crown tells them to. But every time I do, there is a grey wolf that crosses the whole room to sit at my feet, in front of everyone, until I come away from it, because he has decided, with the stubbornness of an animal that waited 3 years in a wood for me to come back, that I am never going to stand against that wall alone again. So tell me, that first day in the great hall, when his wolf passed every chosen girl and walked the full length of the floor to a servant against the wall, do you think the man already knew, in that moment, exactly who I was? Or was it only the wolf, remembering, while Magnus stood on the dais and lost the same argument he'd been losing for 3 years? I have my answer. I'd rather hear yours. Leave it below, and if you want to follow what an ordinary girl did with a throne nobody meant her to have, and the letters that are still arriving from a forest in the north, comment the bread and stay with me. I'll keep some in my pocket. You never know who's caught in the woods.